Hospital workers, serious, what regrets do you hear from dying patients? He wished he had been a better father to his daughter. He wished they had reconnected. His dementia prevented him from remembering they had reconnected years before and that she visited often. I wish I could have made him aware that he had accomplished his last wish. But he died not really understanding that. Holy shit, this is the saddest post in the entire thread. Shucks, all this shit is sad. I'm outer here. I worked as an oncology nurse right out of nursing school. I was barely 21 years old. Had a patient about my age who was dying of lung cancer. A few hours before he died, I sat with him and he was telling me how much he wished that he would have had more time to maybe fall in love, marry, have kids. He was so young. He asked me to call his parents and he died shortly after they arrived. It was awful. His regrets were more about the life not lived. Many older patients had some interesting life stories and most wanted to tell them before they died. Most were at peace with the life they lived. Many regretted working so much and not spending enough time with family. Sometimes I feel my bones straining under the weight of all the lives I'm not living. Jonathan Safran 4, extremely loud and incredibly close. I was a new nurse, flying solo. We got a call for an incoming trauma, woman in her 50s involved in a multi-car accident. We were already at the ambulance bay, unsure of the woman's complete condition. She rolled in breathing on her own, but very labored with asymmetrical chest expansion. She was profusely bleeding, had multiple deep lacerations. Pupils blown, debris covering most of her, etc. Her vitals were unstable, she was circling the drain, we knew she was on the verge of coding. I was standing near her head, ready to assist in supporting her airway. But also providing comfort and doing my best to calm her. The woman looked me directly in the eyes and in a hoarse, labored voice stated, I was angry. I told her I was disappointed in her. She began to cry. Her vitals plummeted. I'm sorry, was the last thing she said before her heart stopped. We coded her, intubated her, performed round after round of ACLS, only to eventually have to call time of death. I still see her face at times, her eyes filled with more emotional pain than physical. It took much longer and was so much harder to write this than I thought it would be. Oh man, that was my biggest fear as a kid, and still pretty big now. My mom and I had a thing that no matter how angry we were or how busy, we would tell each other I love you before splitting up. Whether it was a short car ride, a phone call, or a cross-country trip, just in case. I read this and teared up. It's almost a metaphor for the pain we pass to each other as humans. One person's torture leads to another's. You have to live with that traumatic memory now, but it's not your fault, not really hers either. In a confession subreddit, a dude confessed how he was with a man. During his last moments, he crashed his truck in the roadside. Op was behind him, called the urgencies. As Op was waiting the ambulance, even hearing it, the man asked after his wife, where she was, that he wanted to see her. Op tried to comfort it the best he could, saying she was on her way. The man died when the ambulance arrived. Sometimes after, Op looked after this man on social networks. He found out that this man's wife was already passed. And that he said to the man that his late wife was on her way. Oh, how a little white lie turned into an oddly comforting truth. God, that last part took my breath away. I want to be there for my husband when he passes, but goddamn if it doesn't feel impossible to handle. The idea that he'll be gone and liminal probably have to watch is so awful. But I still hope it's him that goes first, because I think I'd handle it better than him. We're the same age. I'm glad most people have the so with them. Edit, sorry I was really sleepy and said it wrong. I hope he goes first, not me. Edit 2, all of these stories have me crying first thing in the morning. It makes sense that I'm not the only one worried about this, and I've drawn some comfort from some of you who witnessed a peaceful end. Thanks for the support, Reddit. My mum had a brain aneurysm and was in the ICU after her surgery when I was 12. The outlook was not good. I went to visit her one time. Keep in mind I was told prior to the visit that she was paralyzed down her left side and non-responsive. The moment I walked in and nurses and my aunt said I was there, she started to cry and kick and basically, in my opinion, tell people she did not want me to see her that way. It was very traumatic. She ended up on life support and I was told to come and say my goodbyes as they turned off the machines. I refused because I definitely did not want to see and remember her that way. A decision I do not regret, and a decision I do not think makes me selfish. We've all got the right to protect ourselves from things we feel we might not be strong enough to handle. Sure, people held grudges against me for my decision, but the decision was, in fact, my own, and I know in my heart my mum never would hold that against me. It's been 25 odd years since, and I still see her in my dreams all the time. I still remember all the good stuff. My much older brothers and sisters still tell me that they think the decision I made not to go that day was for the best. I work in a hospital. Whenever someone is at the end of their life, they always just want to be with their loved ones. Any regrets I've heard is always family related. They wanted more time with the people they love. Most people are at peace with things though. People also tend to wish they took their health seriously. They wanted more time with the people they love. When I started college, I moved to a city far away from where I'm originally from. My only relatives living in that city were my grandmother and my aunt. I moved in with my grandma. The move was going to be temporary while I looked for an affordable apartment to rent. My grandma's apartment was a walking distance from my college and I got to spend time with her. It was a win-win situation. A month into living with her, I noticed that she started getting tired a lot more easily. She had trouble breathing and she couldn't sleep. My aunt also noticed this and decided to take her to the hospital. My grandma was diagnosed with lung cancer and died 2 weeks later. I'm just glad I got to spend all that time with her. The last thing I said to her was, "Okay, I'm leaving. See you later." While I was leaving for class, she said, "See you later, take care." That shit's eerie. I still think about it like once a week. I will never forget the last words I said to my dad just a few hours before he died of a massive heart attack. I was a little rude and off-putting because my dad had the tendency to call me about completely unimportant things in the middle of the busy workday. I know he wasn't bothered by it. We always gave each other a healthy dose of shit, but I do wish I had given him a little more time that day. Funny how those memories stick with us. I'll never stop thinking about it. Forgive yourself, child. Hugs. This is exactly it. He wouldn't want you feeling bad over something like that. I was a hospice volunteer and it never happened to me, but several of the other volunteers had stories of patients telling them, "Thanks for everything. Don't bother coming tomorrow as I won't be here," and they would die that night. One had a very sick member. They couldn't figure out how she was hanging on. All of her kids were there but one. That one walked in and the woman smiled and then died. My grandma did this. She was literally on her deathbed in hospice, but my uncle was flying in from Australia. He made it there and then she passed the next day. I read an essay by a dying woman once. I remember the lines, "I want more time with Jason," her husband. "I want more time with my kids." She was 51 when she wrote this and died. Her kids were in college or just past. She'd been married about half her life and her husband was about the same age, so a young widower. What you said just reminded me of that. Everyone wants what they can't have time. This one by Amy Krauss Rosenthal. I read this while waiting for a friend in a Starbucks and was crying so hard by the time my friend arrived that she thought someone I knew personally had died. Edit, I feel a little bad making everyone so sad during an already stressful time, sorry. I got about 5 paragraphs into this before realized there was no way I was ending it without super ugly tears. Andy stopped. I'm sure it's important and meaningful, but I just can't right now, thanks. It's okay, same. Today is not the day for me to read that. Verge of tears all day. This will make me ugly cry inconsolably. Thanks for reminding me of this so I could get my regularly scheduled cry in for the day. That is still my main regret after having to put my dog down the other day. She was 14, beat cancer, had bad hips for 3 years, carried up the stairs for 2, deaf for 1 year. But she quit taking her medicine 3 weeks ago and stopped trusting any food we tried to sneak it in. Her eyes turned yellow after a few days, as she was on liver and kidney meds. She slowly lost her ability to eat, but not before I served her a cumulative 5 IBs of pulled pork and 1/2 ib of beef brisket. She was running in her dreams 3 days before she died, and she told off the neighbor's dog on her last walk like a big girl. I have to stop. I can't finish this comment. Sorry. Edit, with all the awards and replies, I won't be able to give everyone the warm thanks you deserve individually, so here are a couple pictures of Sadie. Smiling and clearly plotting something. I don't want to undermine your sentiment here, but it sounds like you did everything you could for her. Grieving is a healthy way to honor those who we've loved and keep their memories alive. It would be a disservice to warp that by blaming yourself. I know I did everything I could for her, but I still feel terrible. I can still see her scared eyes making direct contact with mine when they gave her the feel-good cocktail before the lethal dose. Same look she made for every injection, but I knew this one was different, so it hurt me. I don't have a friend laying against my chair right now, and she'll never bury her head in my lap again during ear rubs. She was so vocal. Even after she went deaf, we developed sign language communication. When printed organs become a thing, I will include that cost in my rainy day fund for future family. I was a hospice nurse. One of my elderly patients had skin cancer, a huge malignant melanoma on the side of his neck that was growing rapidly. He had been a farmer all his life and never married. One night we were talking and I asked him if there was anything he wished he had done differently in his life, and he thought about it a minute and said he wished he had worn a hat when he was farming. I wish he did too. I love his answer. I hope he's farming in a better place now, with a hat on. I hope he's wearing a really big fancy sombrero while he's farming up in the skies above and beyond. End of life physician here. CPER. No, seriously, hear me out. Imagine using your hands to crush the sternum down 2 inches repeatedly of your 90-year-old grandmother who weighs 90 pounds. So that maybe you can then put her on a ventilator from which she might never get off alive. We ask this of everyone who comes into the hospital, but too often it's asked more like, hey, if you're drowning, do you want us to save you? Rather than what it truly is, especially for those who most likely won't survive it in the first place, and if they do will be significantly worse off than they were before they died. The survival statistics for patients with 1 to 2 significant comorbidities with an in-hospital cardiac arrest is like less than 5% to leave alive, and then 30-day survival is 5% of that original 5%, if I remember correctly. I cannot count the number of times families were adamant on having it done to their loved one only to then see what it entails firsthand and beg us not to do it again. My husband, 33, suffered cardiac arrest last year in December. We were alone in a strange city, looking for a place to eat. Luckily, the car was barely moving at the time because he was driving. I did chest compressions until rescue arrived, about 5 minutes. What I learned in the ER that night is that outcomes for cardiac arrest are typically terrible if the patient doesn't regain consciousness right away. He immediately prepared me for likely brain damage. Somehow, he woke up with his brain perfect as they were preparing to limb him down. About 3 hours after his collapse. I learned during his hospital stay that chest compressions outside of a hospital almost never have a good outcome. His heart was completely done and he had to get a transplant, but we got so lucky with his CPER. I'm glad I didn't know what might have happened because I don't know I would have been able to keep going. My mother-in-law, her husband, stepdad to my husband, would not leave her alone in the hospital for 1 minute. He is a controlling, crazy man. My husband was visiting and somehow she convinced his scrap dad to go take a break. She pulled my husband, her son, close and said, I don't want to be kept alive on machines. Her husband was her power of attorney, so my husband had no power. She was kept alive way longer than needed. I think, in the end, she regretted trusting him. I was in a similar situation, but it happened to my sister instead. Basically, my mom dropped me off with my brother to relatives in another city. My sister's lungs had collapsed and she was taken to the hospital, and she remained in a coma for 7 months straight, and everyone, the doctors, estranged father, fellow patients, family members, and the nurses begged her to just sign some documents, pull the life support plug, and let my sister die in peace. My mother screamed at him and said she would never do that. Eventually the people began to prepare a special kind of body bag and the doctors said they were getting ready to pronounce her dead as things did not look like they would recover. Then suddenly one day my sister came back to life, but the doctors couldn't figure out what made her awake from the coma, and they declared it a miracle. This happened about a decade ago. However, as a result, my mother basically went insane from the mental stress and has now basically isolated herself from society and awaits an oncoming apocalypse and believes that people are attempting to assassinate her. It is chilling to think that I wouldn't have my sister in my life had my mother given into the pressure, and it makes me grateful to look up from typing this comment and seeing her across the room also browsing Reddit on her phone, but probably about something regarding makeup rather than ask Reddit. I did training to be a CNA and we had to work in a nursing home as part of our training. I didn't really get into any deep conversations with the patients there, but I can say this: if you have family in a nursing home, please visit with them. It's a sad and lonely place to be. It really is. I'm doing my nursing school clinical in one right now and it's fucking sad. On my shift yesterday, people asked me to translate for one resident who was agitated and crying in Portuguese. No one could understand her. I went to her room and asked her what she needs. She said she wants to go to bed and sleep, she's alone, doesn't have her husband, and her kids forgot about her. It's just sad, I'm all alone, she said with tears in her eyes. Please visit your family if they're in a nursing home. Paramedic, but close enough. Made a run on a woman in her 30s for shortness of breath. Her and her boyfriend had just moved into an apartment together. They were fighting over something trivial, which room to unpack first or something. He thought she was just being dramatic. We transported, she never made it. Went from awake and talking to unresponsive and asystolic, no cardiac activity, in a matter of seconds. They were so caught up in a little argument that they never said goodbye. They never told each other they loved them. She didn't have any last words. And honestly, that's even worse. Back when I was a teenager, my brother and I were real close. We would watch scary things together. Ghost adventures, Haunted, a bunch of other cheesy things. He loves running into my bedroom and asking if I wanted to play COD Zombies. Which he totally sucked at, was a horrible listener. My mom did home health and hospice. My stepdad was very abusive and my mom would take me to work with her to try and protect me. She didn't want to leave him due to religious beliefs. That's a different story. There was an old man. I'd play cards with him. We'd talk about working on the farm we had. He was a nice guy. He figured out I was being physically abused. His health started declining and he couldn't play cards or get out of bed. The last time I saw him, he said he was sorry he wasn't younger and that he couldn't help me. Almost 25 years ago, and I still remember him. Dang, this one hit me in the heart. I had a patient who I was in the room with when her doctor explained she only had a few weeks to live, knew her well, spent quite a bit of time talking to her up to the news. The days that followed, she seemed to have accepted she was dying. She lived this beautiful, independent, and successful life, maybe not money successful, but just plain happy. Anyways, when I was helping her to the tub on day 10 since receiving the news, she just broke down crying and couldn't stop crying about how much she wished she didn't put her dog down. See, they could have died together. Come to find out, her dog was on his deathbed too. I guess she put her dog down a few days before going into the hospital. She knew her life was over, so she put him down first. She hated herself for it and for the fact she blew the opportunity for them to spend their last moments together. Really heartbreaking to watch, to hear that unfold. She passed early in the morning 2 days later. I took a couple of mental health days off after she passed and spent some time looking up dogs to adopt and new jobs to apply for. Poor woman. I think she did the kindest thing for her dog so he wouldn't be alone if when something happened to her, but I understand where she was coming from. If there is an afterlife, I hope they're back together. And I'm glad she had you there with her during such a hard event. Yeah, I agree. When my grandma died, her cat just never liked anyone else and spent the rest of his life looking in different rooms for her.